But
Okay.
I did have something to talk about.
Little thing.
I
to
got
talk about.
online and there was this debate that Matt had done. Often I don't listen to the debates. I'm not really that into debate, but
They do kind of blend together.
I did listen to
sometimes.
it, and there was a section of it where it was really disturbing to me what somebody was arguing. Basically, they were going over trying to assert again and again that there is a lot of explanatory power or explanatory function when it comes to God. And so what they were saying was that there's explanatory function in regard to, explaining the universe being created or explaining the resurrection is very simple. It's a very minor thing to raise someone from the dead if you have gods. And so it has a lot of explanatory power because there's all these things it can explain. And I don't think they understand what explain means, right? Because that doesn't really explain anything. It's kind of like saying if magic exists, then raising someone from the dead is a very minor thing because I can do magic, right?
Yes.
Or if creating a universe would be no big thing because you could just magically produce one if there's magic. But that doesn't really explain anything.
If the whole universe is a simulation.
Yeah, the idea is that yes, it's true that if magic were real, it would account for absolutely anything you would want to account for because it's magic, but it doesn't really offer an explanation for anything. It doesn't really tell you how anything was produced through the magic, right? Magic is actually what you label basically saying, let's just say it happened and we really don't have an explanation for the mechanism, and so we'll just call it magic. And God works very similarly. Mm-hmm. And so the definition of God that was put forward in the debate was, outside of space and time and that whole deal. And so what you do right there is you've now separated the thing and put it into a situation that is completely alien.
You basically set it up so that, everything has rules except this thing to which you say the rules don't apply.
Well, but more than that, you've placed it in a context that is now incomprehensible.
Right.
So that there's no way to relate to it. So if something is existing outside of space and time, that means that its existence is different than all of the existence that we consider existing. I don't know what would exist outside of space and time. I don't know what that means. I don't know how to even comprehend such a thing. If such a thing can be done and can be, it would be so different than any other existence that you would be familiar with and that you would define as, existence, that it almost wouldn't be worth putting it in that same category, right? I mean, it would be such a foreign concept and such a foreign mode of being that would be not what we consider being. So what you've got is an incomprehensible cause, so you might as well just label that X, because you can't touch it, you can't examine it, you can't reach outside of space and time and assess this thing for any sort of information about it. You have no mechanism to assess that cause, so it's cause X. I mean, really all you've done is given me an undefined variable and said there's this incomprehensible X thing that I think is there, and it's not like anything else, and we don't understand. It's like, just whatever. It's mysterious.
It's like believers who argue in this way like to say that they're doing, what they're doing is consistent with science.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that.
But I'm just saying when you're doing science, guessing a thing that could be the cause of another thing is only the first step, because the next thing that you do is go look for specific ways to nail that thing down. I was just watching Cosmos a couple nights ago. We're behind, but we were watching the 4th episode, and there was this stuff where this one scientist was coming up with this idea of dark stars, and it wasn't just because they seemed to be a good idea. It was because when you look through a telescope at a specific spot, there was a planet that seemed to be orbiting something, but there was nothing obviously visible there. And he was like, well, there's got to be some kind of mass because that's the way orbiting works. But just coming up with that idea of dark stars, or as they later came to be called, black holes, wasn't the end of it. They had to come up with, okay, we've got this specific thing that could account for that orbiting. Now what are we, what else should we look for to verify that it's that and not
Right.
something else?
But even that you have access to.
Right.
Right? I mean, you're looking at it, you're examining it in some way.
Yeah,
you're
with the
assessing
God thing,
it.
you're just putting it out of bounds.
Right, you're saying this is outside of anything you could possibly understand, and so let's just start with that. It's like, okay, so we're starting with an unknown X that is undefined. And then when it comes to, they just throw in this, it created, it designed, but there's no explanation of the mechanism here. There's no explanation for how this cause actually functioned in order to produce anything that it produced. There's no explanation of how it functioned to resurrect someone from the dead. There's no explanation of how it functioned to actually produce a universe. It's just, it did it, right? It did it. So the thing that we don't understand did something we can't explain, and then this. Mm-hmm. And they're like, this is an explanation. This has all this explanatory power. It has it doesn't. It has none whatsoever. There is no explanation there. They have not explained anything. They've said, this is here. We don't know how it got here. We don't know what caused it, but God. And then they start making all these attributes to it. Mm-hmm. And it's simply, one of the things they were saying was, well, have you ever seen a Big Bang? And it's like, well, Big Bang has to do with, like you said, you look at the model of the expansion, and you say, let's reverse that expansion, let's play it back, let's see what happens, and it starts condensing down into like a smaller unit. And then you start making models based on what you can examine, right? So you're examining matter, you're examining
the shift of light, how fast things are moving.
And so you're kind of working backwards from the data. And that is, when you reach a point where you say, oh, the physical evidence that we can examine no longer speaks to anything, that's when your explanation has to stop. You quit explaining when you have no data on which to justify your speculations anymore, right? So at that point, when you start speculating and the data is no longer there's no more information to justify what you're talking about, you have now started hitting that realm of unjustified beliefs and unjustified speculations where you're just pulling it out of thin air. But the idea, if something explains an event in the same way magic explains the event, it's not an explanation. That's the label you put onto something when you don't know how to explain it. You just say it just magically occurred. And that's how they're doing this with God. It just God magically does it.
Right.
I don't know how else to explain that. I mean, if you can't understand that, I don't know how you're really not understanding the failure to elucidate, right? The failure to explain. There is no further understanding of what happened.
Yeah, well, you're bringing in this thing as an explanation, and you're not bringing in evidence that thing in particular exists, which, is what we get into conversations about all the time. Oh, no, God, don't tempt God.
Well, you're even
with
redefining existence,
evidence.
Right? I mean, they're redefining existence.
But, I mean, you're not providing evidence that he exists, and you're putting him in this special category where he can't be looked at, and you're failing to in any way explain the thing that you say is the explanation.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a useless hypothesis.
It's like a mysterious God to everything, and the in-between is just sort of, well, it's God.
Right.
And that's the same as saying it's magic.
Yeah. You might as well just say, why do these two chemicals have this reaction?
Magic.
God.
Yeah, it's
you
the same.
would never actually find out anything about chemistry that way.
And that's why magic shows are so amazing, because you see something that you can't really explain it because you don't know how the trick works, right? So if somebody saws another person in half, they split the thing apart, and you're like, how can you do that? It's not possible to saw someone in half and still have them, moving and happy and smiling. And so magic, that's the magic show, right? That's why it looks like magic. And if magic were real, sawing somebody in half and having them smiling and waving would be no small feat, right? I mean, just like if God were real, the resurrection would be well, yeah, but it wouldn't explain how you did it. Magic's not an explanation.
Right.